that doesn't blow your ears off, okay? So tonight, guess what we're talking about? Hidden infection and multiple sclerosis. So their infectious triggers for MS is not something new. This is something that has been written about in the medical literature at least since the 60s, when we really started to knuckle down on studies, right? In natural medicine and naturopathic medicine, we've understood this as a contributing factor for hundreds of years. So, we've got, traditional ancient natural medicine, we've got science. So hopefully in the decades to come, it will move into the medical model because it's not there yet. I get feedback and looks and comments when I suggest that we do some testing for latent infection from people like, what are you talking about? Like, you must be nuts. Or why didn't my neurologist tell me about this? Or, those kind of things, the things that I've heard pretty nonstop for the last 20 years, right? But I've got to tell you, my inbox blew up when Harvard Medical School published their article on Epstein-Barr. So it's called Epstein-Barr Virus may be leading cause of multiple sclerosis. So not an article, it was a study. So here we've got the medical schools now doing studies on this stuff. So that is great. So there's part of me that goes, yeah, finally, welcome to the table. And the other part is just like grateful that maybe before I die, we'll actually see a system of medicine that can help people. So I just want to pull out some of the key messages from this study. And they said this is a big step because it suggests that most MS cases could be prevented by stopping Epstein-Barr infection, and that targeting Epstein-Barr could lead to the discovery of a cure for MS. So that's an interesting, very bold statement. And when you're doing research, you want to be bold, right? So stopping Epstein-Barr infection, that's a pretty brave statement because Epstein-Barr affects 95% of the population. You don't have to be laid out with mono for 3 months to have Epstein-Barr. It is ubiquitous. It's sort of like Omicron, right? Everybody's going to get it. I thought you choked like I mentioned Omicron, like don't do that. And then of course there's the big cure word. Well, when we understand that model that we've been talking about, and I'm going to review it in a few minutes, then the cure becomes incidental. It becomes, I call it the C word. Let's just leave it with that, okay? Another thing directly from the study, it says it establishes a latent, lifelong infection for the host. So these are super important words coming out of the medical model because they don't do latent, lifelong infection. They do acute infection, right? And they said that symptoms begin about 10 years after an Epstein-Barr infection. So to that little story I told y'all a little while ago about that 29-year-old young lady that I had with cancer years and years ago who said, I was perfectly healthy until I was diagnosed with cancer yesterday. No. Multiple sclerosis, like cancer, like anything else, is something that evolves over time, right? Another comment was that the risk of MS increased 32-fold after infection with Epstein-Barr, but was unchanged after infections with some other viruses. 32-fold, that's significant, right? And that the delay between Epstein-Barr infection and the onset of MS may be partially due to the disease's symptoms being undetected during the earliest stages and partially due to the evolving relationship between Epstein-Barr and the host immune system, which is repetitively stimulated whenever latent viruses reactivate. So what do I want to say about that? The biggest thing is, once again, to the comment that I made also some time ago about, I talk to people who say, oh, my MS isn't bad enough to do anything. Well, it's when we're feeling good. It's when we're doing real well. It's when symptoms are at a minimum that we really, really, really want to be doubling down on everything, and working with our health so that to prevent the aggravation of that disease. So I want to put that back into the context of that model that I keep giving you over and over again. And for those of you that are new, please go back and watch some of the old videos. But here's the model of MS. It's super simplified, honestly, because MS is so complicated. But we've got that inappropriate activation or reactivation of the immune system that causes inflammation that plays itself out in the brain. So, and gives the neurological symptoms. So this is perfect example of that, right? Now, there are other things when it comes to viruses and multiple sclerosis. And one of those is a direct viral toxic effect. So viruses can be directly neurotoxic, and they can also promote disease through something called molecular mimicry. So basically, they dupe the immune system into believing that they're myelin, and because the immune system, that inappropriate immune response in people with MS is triggered towards the myelin basic protein, then the immune system says, oh my gosh, there's some more of that myelin. I need to ramp up my game and attack that harder. Okay. So what we've got here with these chronic latent infections, just think about what those words mean. Chronic means ongoing. Latent means latent. It wanes, it gets reactivated, it wanes, it gets reactivated. It basically flies below the acute radar. So the acute infection is what our medical model does super well, right? If you've got an acute infection, you can go and you can get some treatment for that, and they can eradicate that infection fairly efficiently. But it's that chronic, latent, that churning of that inappropriate immune response that is upregulating the inflammation, which is upregulating the attack on the brain tissue that is presenting with those symptoms, right? Some of you have shared this with me already, but how many of you have had like a regular flu or a regular cold and it knocked you out for like twice as long as anybody else in the family? You had no energy, your legs were rubber, you couldn't walk. That is the acute, and the acute has the same impact, right? It still aggravates that inappropriate immune response because you've got this viral load that's increasing the inflammation, that's playing itself out in the brain. So the chronic illness does that too. You just don't know because you don't have all the acute symptoms. You don't have a fever. You don't have you don't have aches and pains. You don't have all those viral symptoms. One interesting thing that I read as I was preparing for this was that 27% of exacerbations are related to reactivation of those latent infections. So 27%, almost 30%. Are you freaking kidding me? Statistically speaking, that is ginormous. Like that is a huge percent of exacerbations being related to reactivation of those latent infections. So, put that together with a little bit of the stress response and some other things that may be going on. There you go. You've got the great soup mix for a beautiful exacerbation. Okay. So, Jeffrey, did that answer your question about that UTI? Because, my friend, my message to you is, so Jeffrey shared with the group, so I'm just sharing because you shared, Jeffrey, that in June he had a UTI, and after that, his ability changed from being able to walk to needing a cane or a walker. So now we know what's going on there, Jeffrey. That whole system has been upregulated. So what you need to do now is downregulate it. Oh, who's the Facebook user who asked me about worms and parasites?
Let me go back to that.
It's just the second last one. It just comes up as Facebook user for me. That's a great question, and I'm going to talk about that. And Teresa had COVID last week, so this is completely relevant to that. Never felt so terrible as far as exacerbation of MS symptoms. Absolutely, Teresa. Absolutely. I'm seeing that a lot. Like right now, Omicron is absolutely everywhere. Everybody's got it. And in people with MS, it will definitely be aggravating. Okay. So I said at the beginning, the world's eye was caught by this news about Epstein-Barr, but it's not just Epstein-Barr. So here are some of the other microbes that have been studied in depth with respect to multiple sclerosis. Of course, as far as the viral family goes, it's not just Epstein-Barr in the herpes family. So Epstein-Barr is from the herpes family. Human herpes virus 6 or HHV6, definitely there, as is varicella zoster. So that's the chickenpox vaccine, the chickenpox virus and the shingles virus. From a bacterial perspective, Mycoplasma pneumoniae and Chlamydia pneumoniae are both directly connected to multiple sclerosis. Don't freak out about Chlamydia pneumoniae. That's the upper respiratory tract bacteria, not the Chlamydia bacteria that causes a sexually transmitted disease. So there's two upper respiratory tract bacteria. There's also Staph aureus, which has been directly connected to multiple sclerosis. From a fungal perspective, you've probably heard the word Candida. Candida is definitely plays a role as an infection, not just in the gut. It can be more systemic. I kind of tread lightly when I use the word systemic with Candida, because when I think of systemic Candida, I think of sort of end-stage AIDS. But if sort of pathognomonic for Candida is what we call a beefy red rash in sort of the folds. So in the armpits, under the breasts, in the groin. If you have a beefy red rash, that is a greater fungal infection. And then, of course, the Borrelia, borreliosis, and Lyme disease and MS. And that is a whole separate discussion. But there is a strong and there's an absolutely strong connection between the bacteria that cause Lyme disease and all the co-infections in MS, because of course there's that neurological component with Lyme disease. Actually, there's groups that don't believe that MS exists. They believe that it's all Lyme disease. I would agree that a huge percentage of people with MS have concurrent Lyme infection, but not all. I know myself, I have spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars testing myself for Lyme because I was a farm girl and played a lot out in the grass. But I have never tested even remotely positive for Lyme. It's that saying that I always say, it's not one thing, it's not two things, it's everything. That actually, in a backward way, applies to this too. You never, no, I shouldn't say never. it's more likely that you have more than one of those infections. So you might have, Epstein-Barr, you might have chlamydia pneumoniae, mycoplasma pneumoniae, and you might have candida all at once, like a smorgasbord of infections that are just poking that immune bear, right? And then, of course, we can't talk about infections without talking about biofilms, because biofilms are the body's, so these chronic latent infections, they've got ways of, they've got their own survival mechanisms. And the first one is that they're chronic and latent. They fly under the radar when it comes to an acute response, which is aimed to destroy an infection. But they also create these biofilms, which are sort of like Harry Potter's invisible cape, right? They put on that invisible cape or they get, they hide in these biofilms to evade the immune system. So biofilms are a whole different thing. You got to be really careful when you start breaking down biofilms, because you literally don't know what's hiding in them. So let's talk about, actually, you know what? I want to talk about when did I start suspecting hidden infections in MS. And remember, I've been practicing for 20 years. And about 10 years ago, I realized you're never going to get over a major hump with someone with MS unless you treat those major infections, or those latent infections rather. And the biggest obstacle to that is the patient. And I'll tell you why. I mentioned it before. Why didn't my neurologist say that? Oh, I've never heard about that. Oh, I don't know what my friends will say. I don't know what my husband will say. I don't know what my parents will say. So there's all kinds of, pushback on going there. So, how we treat, or how I treat anyway, is completely relevant to the patient's state. So to your state, to my state. Okay, so what are some little clues? I wrote down some little clues for you, okay? Some little clues that make me think, okay, we got to dig deeper here, are a cortisol level that you just can't bring down. So these are the people that are wired but tired, like nothing they do will allow them to sleep. Nothing they do will allow them to meditate. So that cortisol is just jacked. So the question is, why is that cortisol jacked? And that cortisol is jacked because the body thinks it's running away from a saber-toothed tiger, which is actually that latent infection poking the immune system. Another little clue is ridiculously low iron store levels. So the iron storage that we measure is called ferritin. And when you have a ridiculously low ferritin, or you've been anemic all your life, you know what? That's just never okay. I hear it all the time from doctors who say, oh, you've always been that way, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If your white blood cells, have always been low, that's not normal, right? Just because your white blood cells are low doesn't mean it's normal. The question is always why. Why is the ferritin low? Why are the white cells low? So the white cells are low because they're fighting the infection. The ferritin is low because the infection is using up those iron stores. A low B12, another thing that's used in infections, actually more in parasites. So we did have a question about parasites. So I'll talk about that in a moment. Low vitamin D. If your vitamin D is in the tank, you can take more vitamin D, but why is your vitamin D low, especially in MS? That is a piece of information you must figure out. Chronic sinus infections, right? Chronic sinus infections, that to me, that's a straight up example of the mycoplasma pneumoniae And the chlamydia pneumonia, great, safe, cuddly, warm, moist, nutritious place to hide out. Nail biters. Yeah, if you bite nails, right? Those hands have been everywhere, so there can be all kinds of crap under those nails. Parasites, bacteria, viruses, right? I always look at people's fingernails. Always. Lots of travel. If you're, first of all, those airplanes are disgusting. And the sickest people I treat are pilots and flight attendants, long-time pilots and long-time flight attendants. And then, they're just gross. I look at the overall vitality and medical history of someone. So the first thing I do is when I meet someone new, is just get a sense of their vitality. You know, if they got lots of vitality, are they just kind of slinking into the room? What's going on? And then what is the medical history? So yeah, their vitality is low now. Oh, by the way, I was a sick kid. I was sick from the moment I was born. Oh, okay. So vitality is really low, you know, or my vitality has been low since something happened. And oftentimes it's an acute infection. So there's another piece of information. If you've never been well since, that's always a huge piece of information, okay? That beefy red rash that I was talking about, persistent toenail fungus. Persistent toenail fungus is a huge sign of fungal overgrowth in the whole system, right? The outside always shows you what's going on the inside. If you had a really sick mom when she was pregnant with you, God bless her for giving birth to you, but she probably passed some of that lack of vitality down to you. And the last clue for me is that super unstable picture, that, you know, dizzy, wobbly, unstable, weak, feel nauseous, can't think, you know, that super, super, super complicated symptomatic picture, especially when it doesn't improve with lifestyle medicine. So with the self-care we've talked about, especially the castor oil packs, with the nutritional changes, with exercise, with mind-body connection, because that makes huge change in everybody. And if you tell me that it doesn't, you're lying. And I mean that, okay? So I have had, and this is the flip side to all those little clues I just gave you, I have had super keen people that are super fit and are, you know, oh my God, I've got this diagnosis, I want to do absolutely everything, and we test them. They don't have any signs. I don't have any outward suspicion, but we test them for latent infections, and sure enough, they come back full of it. So remember what this study showed. This study showed that, you know, the infections actually start 10 years before people become symptomatic. So those are the super keeners. So we go ahead and we treat. And of course, what do we say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Now, a little something that we can't avoid discussing when we're talking about latent infection, and that is the topic of mold. So I want to see it in your chat, in my chat here. Oh, I can scroll?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh boy, look at all these. Oh, Angela, I'll tell you about tests in a minute. You can talk to Bogda. And I see Renee. I see you laughing. I'm thinking about you, my dear. Anyway, I want to see in the chat if you have ever lived in a basement apartment, if you have ever had a roof leak in your home, if you've ever had a wet basement in your home. I want to know if you've ever done a renovation and discovered a little cache of mold somewhere. I want to know if you've ever had a bathroom renovated. I want to see that in a chat. I want to know, I want to know, I want to know, because mold has become really ubiquitous, and our understanding of mold has just grown exponentially. Like, when was it we started talking about the sick building syndrome and the portables that were making the kids sick? Do you remember that, where the portable classrooms were making the kids sick and stuff? That was mold. I think it was the 80s. I think it was the early 80s. Yes, yes, and yes, Renee. Wet basement. Yep. Okay. So if you've lived in those situations, bathroom renovation, mold in the shower, right? Been lucky and not had living, but my parents' home renovations were there. So this is the thing, right? Like I said, I'm going to bear it all to you in a few minutes and tell you about my story, my own story, chronic sinusitis, and each MRI shows it. Oh my God, Candace, that is so cool. So they actually see the fungal infestation in your sinuses. Wow, that's cool. Yeah, a neti pot, cool. That's a good start. And an allergy pill. Well, the allergy pill doesn't answer the question why, does it? Windows, so moldy windows, I suppose. Mold around the carpet near the baseboards. Yikes! You know what? I've got a picture. How about the greenhouse? Yeah, right? So it depends how your greenhouse is built. Renovated, mold, Joanne. So I wish I had pictures that I could easily access. I'm going to put them up. I'm going to post them. I had a kid who was in her first year university, and she brought me pictures of her moldy baseboards, and you guys are going to crap when you see these pictures. I thought I needed to report it to somewhere. I thought it was like a massive human rights violation, because we've got these kids, right? We've heard of student slums. This was ridiculous. So mold is, yeah, moldy office for 4 years. Absolutely. Yeah. Renovated a bathroom right beside my bedroom. I just had a patient yesterday, a new patient whose neurological symptoms were onset with his COVID vaccination. So, I'm not one of those crazy naturopaths that says, oh my gosh, it was the vaccination. Because what's the question? The question is always why. So through the intake, he mentioned to me that they just underwent a massive demolding, he said. And, when I hear that, I slap my forehead, because there's so many shysters out there when it comes to demolding. But he had somebody that literally stripped rooms of his house back to the studs, cut pieces out of the floor. So this guy was serious. But for 20 years, this guy has lived in this house. So what do? We went straight off and did some testing. So mold create toxins called mycotoxins, okay? And mycotoxins, oh my word, the house we lived in university had mushrooms growing off the baseboards, black and red on the ceiling and walls, and bugs hopping all over the ceiling. Charged us $1,000 a month.
That's Candace.
Oh my God, Candace. That's all I can say to that. But that's the kind of thing we do when we're students, right? We move into these student slums because that's what's available, or that's what is affordable, right? So what is it about mold? So first of all, I'm a visual person, so I think of everything in pictures. And I think of mold as a big, ugly scab on the top of this festering wound of infection. So it's completely immunosuppressive. So it will crush your immune system just like a disease-modifying agent will. So, oops, slip that in, right? So disease-modifying agents, big deal when we're dealing with chronic latent infection. Okay? Just saying. And mycotoxins are themselves wildly neurotoxic. So think about this guy that I just told you about, who had all these neurological symptoms. He hasn't been diagnosed with MS, but he came to me because I deal with the brain. That's what I do. The trigger might have been the vaccination, but I believe that the problem, the answer to the why, is the mold. Okay, so coming more and more into the limelight, massive obstacle. Yes. Okay. So what kind of testing can be done? I'm sorry, I forgot who asked me that, but here's what I do, because there's a million kinds of tests that go on. And nowadays, with functional medicine becoming all the rage, there's a lot of functional medicine doctors that I believe take it a little bit too far with testing. I've actually had patients that have seen another functional medicine doctor before me and have said, yeah, they wanted me to do $4,000 worth of testing and not to come back until I had it done. Well, you know what? I live with MS too. I get it. We need to be able to make these things as affordable as possible, right? So here's what I do. The 3 tests that I do regularly. The first one is an organic acid test from the Great Plains Laboratory. They are down in Tennessee, I think. The Great Plains Laboratory organic acid test. It gives you 76 urinary metabolites that give us a sampling of what's going on. If that comes back positive, or if I suspect mold right off the bat, then we'll add a mold panel or a mycotoxin panel from Real Time Labs, which is down in Texas. And Real Time Labs, you can order directly. I believe you can order directly off their website. You don't have to have a practitioner. I don't know about the organic acids. You used to be able to order directly off their website as a consumer, but you need to be able to have somebody who can interpret those for you. And then, and the last lab that I use this lab because the founder of this lab is an absolute expert in Lyme and all of the Lyme co-infections, as well as the bacterial infections, as well as the viral infections, and that is Armin Labs in Germany. So those are the 3 tests that I find really helpful. Each of the, so the oat is about $385 Canadian. The oat, organic acid test oat. The Real Time Labs is about $399 US. And the Armin Labs is more expensive, admittedly. I've gotten pretty clever with being able to order from them and can usually keep it around $1,200. That's Canadian as well. So so those are the 3 to answer the testing question. So my message here is that chronic infections are absolutely an issue in MS. And I like to take people through what we've been taking you through, understanding how the body heals, understanding where your vitality is, how important it is for you individually based on some of those clues that I gave you. But this is complex, and you've got the biofilms, you've got the mold saga. This is not something I would recommend venturing out on your own. I've seen people actually aggravate like crazy. You know, like I'm the person they come to when they go to all these summits and figure out they've got to treat themselves immediately, and they do everything all at once and aggravate the crap out of themselves, and then show up to for me to mop up the whole mess, right? So I will quickly tell you two stories. First, I'm going to tell you a story about Sam, and then I'm going to tell you my own story because it's actually current. And remember, I've had MS for 36 years, and this is new information for me. So a young man by the name of Sam came to see me. And Sam was also going through the process of ruling MS out. He was 21 years old. He was an outdoorsy kind of guy. He owned a landscaping company, and he had all the worst symptoms of MS. And we were talking, and really just casually at the end of my intake with him, and he said something about his new apartment and having to come through the basement to get into his apartment. And I said, tell me about that basement, Sam. I said, how does it smell? I said, does it smell musty? By the way, musty, another clue. Musty is always mold. And he said, oh yeah, it smells pretty musty. He said, if I go away for the weekend, he said, I really have to air it out. And so anyway, we got into our mold conversation and established that this kid had been exposed to all kinds of mold. So we did the organic acid test, and we did the real-time mycoplasma test, mycotoxin test. And sure enough, he came back just full of mold toxins. So the cool thing about this was it was still relatively new because he had just moved there. All his symptoms, by the way, started when he moved into this new place. And so first of all, we did all of the basics that you and I have been talking about, the diet, the self-care, the exercise, the mind, body. And then we did like the smallest little mold treatment, and honest to God, he was about 95% better. Like it seemed like overnight to me, which was 3 months. And of course, I haven't heard from Sam for a while because he's a 21-year-old guy, and naturally he feels great, and so he doesn't understand that, we still need to be working. But that was a great one because he was young, his vitality was high, it was new exposure. That was great. Now I'm going to share with you my story. And I didn't realize it until I moved into this loft. So Mike and I have been living in this loft for about 8 months now, and it's a transitional place, as you've probably heard from my little comments here and there, is we have purchased a home and are moving to Nova Scotia. The great thing is my practice stays the same because I'm a virtual practitioner. But when we moved here, shortly after we moved here, about 2 months after we moved here, I started to realize I had warm hands and feet for the first time in my adult life. I was diagnosed when I was in my early 20s, right? I was sleeping through the night without the megaton of herbs and melatonin and other crap that I had been taking for decades to get to sleep. So all of a sudden I'm sleeping through the night and I've got warm hands and feet. And I started thinking about it. And at the same time, the people that bought our house, we know them, they had just finished a kitchen reno. And they had said, by the way, just so you know, we found a massive mold stash behind the pantry when we pulled all the cabinets out. So we had a little leak. We didn't think anything of it. Mike thought he caught it in time. But every once in a while, we got a little whiff of mold, and then we questioned ourselves, was that mold? Was that? No, we caught that.
Couldn't find it.
Yeah, couldn't find it. Yeah, couldn't find it. Also, when we moved into that house, it was owned by a little old lady, God bless her soul, and the place smelled so musty. I didn't know back then that musty equaled mold, that it was so musty that I could actually taste the musty after we had visited with her. So as it turns out, I lived in a moldy home for 20 years. Prior to that, I was in 2 basement apartments, one of which, who was it here that mentioned the mushrooms, one of which there was a water spill from the hot water heater that got my carpet wet. We dried it all out. We did. And 2 weeks later, oh, guess what? Mushrooms growing out of my carpet. Didn't think anything of it. When I lived in my parental home, I lived in the basement after I was 12 years old because that was the groovy thing to do. And that basement flooded at least twice a year. And what did we do? We rolled the carpet up. We brought in the big fan. We dried it up. We rolled that carpet back out. And it did that. I lived there until I went to university when I was like 20, whatever. And so, and our first matrimonial home. When we first got married, we had water. We had water literally running down the walls when it rained in our bedroom.
Flat roof.
So flat roof, horrible thing. So moral of the story is exposed to mold since I was a child. Didn't even realize it. Now I've done Armin Labs testing on myself. I also know that I'm full of, Epstein Barr, human herpes virus 6, and like a number of different things. I've actually had shingles, and that the mother lode patch, which is right here, has flares up now. So it talks to me. So I've got those viruses hidden in my nerves, which flare when my system gets aggravated. So I am now working with my naturopath to get rid of the mycotoxins and the mold. And I got to tell you, it's been a bumpy ride. It's been an absolutely bumpy ride, because every time we poke that bear, man, my body goes, oh, you want some of this? Here, take it. And that bursitis that I've been canceling about lately, I'm absolutely sure that it is an aggravation caused by one of the protocols, my last protocol from my naturopath. So this is what I mean by you've got to be super, super, super careful, because it's complex and it can blow you up. And if you're not prepared for that, then it can be a showstopper. It can make you throw your hands up in the air and go, nothing works. I happen to know that aggravation is a normal part of healing. And so I'm just biting on my finger here to get beyond it. Not a mold thing, but what about MDF? I swear I had chronic sinus infections from working with MDF for years. So 2 things about the MDF, Michelle. It is a mold thing, because the pictures I'm going to post about the mold, those are all on MDF. MDF is just a garbage board, right? It's just it's just a sponge. It sucks stuff up, and it's compressed crap. Like, what is MDF made out of?
The emphasis there is the crap. So if you're working with it and cutting it and then breathing that stuff in, God knows what it is, but
definitely.
It's not a natural thing. So
Yeah.
you're probably getting around.
Yeah, it's definitely
Glues,
the
solvents.
fiber board, right? There's the solvents that keep whatever those fibers are together. So yeah, absolutely, you could have chronic sinus issues from that for sure. Okay. So it's just labeled Facebook user for me. Do previous viruses act in the same way, i.e. mono? So do you have a name on this person? This is L'Angel. L'Angel, mono is Epstein-Barr virus, right? So if you have actually had mono, you have had an Epstein-Barr infection. And we know that any Epstein-Barr infection, Epstein-Barr doesn't go away. So if you've had it, if you've had mono, you've got Epstein-Barr virus, okay? That's where I am now. I'm not sure where that is, Sue. So here's somebody saying we're moving to Nova Scotia this summer. Oh, that's Candace. Military because of how expensive real estate is. My husband wants a very old house to renovate, ceilings falling, walls peeling, etc. I want to go higher in our budget to get something clean and done. I've had to show him yeah. Absolutely. You tell your husband to dig deep. You don't want to be in that mess. Or say, okay, honey, you go ahead and spend 6 months there renovating, I'll be here waiting for it to be perfect. And you know what? We've just done that Nova Scotia thing, Candace. You know what? Just ping me, and we can talk about that, because we know exactly.
Home inspection,
Yeah.
humidity,
Yeah.
and water detection in the drywall. There's a lot of things you can do to check for mold.
For sure. Okay. Renee is asking about arthritis. Could mold contribute to this as well? Yes. You know what? Renee, think about that immune system, that inappropriate immune system, right? It causes generalized inflammation, and the joints are the poor suckers that get a lot of aggravation when inflammation happens, generalized inflammation. And yes, remember I said the sinuses are those nice, warm, protected places for viruses or bacteria especially to hide. But the joints are also the synovial fluid, nice and rich, right? Nutrient dense. So a lot of infections can end up there as well. You see a lot of the Lyme stuff ending up in the joints, right? Lyme arthritis is not is very common. Okay, Sue is saying, funny you mentioned shingles. I was wondering if I should get that vaccine because I had chickenpox. Sue. That's all I'm going to say about that, Sue. Okay, Langelle. Did I answer your question about worms and parasites? Did I say? No, I don't think I did, right? So parasites, definitely another bag of tricks, right? So thinking of bags, we are just big bags of bugs, right? So our microbiome has its virome, its viral component. It has its bacterial component. It has its parasitic component. Parasites are very different because there's actually, and worms specifically, because worms are actually being used therapeutically for MS. So you got to be careful there. People go and do these big parasite cleanses and end up worse, probably because they've reactivated a lot of latent infection, but possibly because they're killing off the wrong parasites. So yeah.
Detox probably too, right?
Yeah, well, in the detox, yeah. So be careful there. Great question, and check it out. Do you all know about Google Scholar? Google Scholar it will just give you published peer-reviewed journal articles. So if you just put Google Scholar, it'll take you to a different Google site, and just go MS and worms and see what comes up, and you'll see what's being what's going on there. Okay, there's Renee. Okay, I didn't know that. Michelle, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that was. I haven't had a sinus infection since I stopped working with it 3 hours ago? Or is that 3 years ago? I bet you 3 years ago. Right? That's the MDF, right? I would also like information. Okay, Candace, we will meet. You had pleurisy. So Lorianne had pleurisy. That's super interesting, Lorianne. That's super interesting. And what's the story? How does the story build out around that pleurisy, right? So is pleurisy your weak link, or is pleurisy, is the pleura, is that where those upper respiratory tract infections are hiding on you? Very interesting. Yeah, radon and arsenic is bad in Nova Scotia. Yeah. Living next to a pellet mill bad. You know what, Candace? That's probably right up there with MDF, because what are those pellets made of, right? I remember when I first started practicing, I had a woman who had lived beside a chemical factory, not all that far from my clinic at the time, and she had this upper respiratory nonsense going on. And I said to her, you know what, we're not going to be able to touch this unless you move, because we figured out that what the factory was expelling was sulfur dioxide. So, you know what, that was the end of our therapeutic relationship, because she wasn't going to move. Nothing I could do, right? So yeah, no, don't move in beside a pellet mill, please. Oops, 3 years. Gotcha. What if you're prone to cold sores? Joanne, fabulous question. Cold sores are the herpes virus, right? So just like shingles, just like Epstein-Barr, and those herpes viruses and MS seem to have this lovely little relationship, right? Okay, thank you for all your questions. This is a huge topic and I get it. So I'm thinking we need to probably dive into it a little bit more a little bit later. You know, obviously I can't give you protocols to use because I don't know your stories, but you know, if there's a way, maybe some way to like unpack your own story to detect your vulnerability in this area or something like that. Remind me that I said that, will you? Okay.
I just wanted to say that Teri started off today saying, I don't have a lot to talk about today. I only have 2 pages of notes here, so it's only been an hour. But
I'm sorry.
they're still with us, Teri. Most of them are still with us. So I think
well, I'm glad you're still with me because I really, 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 really am trying to get this down to a half an hour so that, you know, because I know you're all over the world. But I'm glad you're still here. But let's just see what Sue's saying here. I've been dealing with a reno on an 80-year-old home, and the basement doesn't have a living space because it's where the well is. And for garden tools, it does smell musty. Sue, I enter from the outside of the house. There is no entrance from the inside of the house. It's still a concern. Yes, it's still a concern getting into the main living area. So another thing about mold is even if you have a massive demolding, like the fellow I was telling you about today, that mold is on your furniture, that mold is on your cabinetry. So you really need to do a massive thyme oil, THYM, the herb thyme oil, is the most effective anti-mold agent known to man. So there is a product that's made in Oakville, Ontario. What's it called? I'll think of it and I'll post it in the group, and it's beautiful. You just spray it on and leave it on. Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm a newbie. Thank you for your time. Who is that? Facebook user Teresa. Welcome, Teresa. Yeah. Okay, and those of you who asked me about how to get in touch, I will do that tomorrow. Okay, kids, go have a nice cup of tea and relax. And we'll see you all next week.